Anyone who saw Stan Laurel couldn't help but burst out laughing. His charisma as a member of the legendary comedy duo Laurel and Hardy lives on. Despite his humorous persona, he had a troubled life full of issues such as personal losses and workplace troubles that his fans were unaware of. Stan found it extremely challenging. For him, losing his son to death was among life's greatest tragedies. Let us recall the happy times in Stan Laurel's life before we get into the grief and loss. We need to learn everything there is to know about the comedian who brought laughter to millions of people's faces. His grandparents and father, Arthur Stanley Jefferson, welcomed him into the world in Olverston, Lancaster, on June 16, 1890. In subsequent years, he gained the name Stan Laurel. Both Arthur J. and Margaret Jefferson had careers in the theater. Arthur was a manager and a traveling actor. They couldn't have been more preoccupied with their acting careers to take care of a child on the road. Grandparents George and Sarah Metoff raised Stan in Olverston. In the course of that time, he learned the town pretty well. Going to Holy Trinity Church with his grandparents and apparently developing a serious craving for Beer's Trickle Toffee from Gillam's General Store weren't the only things Stan enjoyed doing while playing with his toys. Stan's grandparents lived across the street from the Hippodrome Theater, and it was there that he first developed an appreciation for live theater. His parents' theater had a cloth roof and was constructed of wood. Even then, his father was penning some of the plays that would propel him to stardom. As an example, Stan didn't limit his childhood playtime to the streets. He also discovered the enchantment of the theater by attending to plays. Despite the tragic fire that destroyed the Hippodrome in 1910, Stan set sail for the United States in the same year. But we will address that in due course. Stan attended King James I Grammar School and the King's School after spending some time living with his grandmother Sarah Metoff in North Shields. Ultimately, Stan's family relocated to Glasgow, where Stan's dad was the proprietor of the Metropole Theatre. Stan originally developed an interest in theater while working at the Three Comics. The theater was his first love when he was 16 years old. The Panopticon in Glasgow was the site of his initial paid performance. At this point, he might have also come to the realization that making people laugh for a living was a fantastic deal. At the age of 21 in 1910, Stan joined Fred Karno's band, performing under the pseudonym Stan Jefferson. When it became clear that the other member of the group wasn't just any old person, Charlie Chaplin, things started to heat up. A tour featuring the two future stars' ludicrous antics was in fact underway. Most likely they were attempting to make each other laugh the hardest. The opportunity to work under Chaplin was even extended to Stan. It was the same ship that brought them both to America. The rest is history, as you are probably aware. Stan volunteered to join the military during the war, but he was exempt due to his resident alien status and deafness. Nothing, though, could deter him from realizing his dream of being a legendary comedian. After the Karno group split up in the spring of 1914, Stan didn't merely hang out until something new happened. He created the Three Comics in collaboration with Edgar Hurley and Ethel, both of whom had previously performed with Karno. The booking agent advised them to change their name to the Keystone Trio, so they did. Keystone Cops, a popular comedy show at the time, was being referenced here. At this point, Stan started toying with his persona by acting out cameos from his old friend Charlie Chaplin. Also around this period, the Hurleys of the Stan Jefferson Trio began portraying the roles of Mabel Normand and Chester Conklin, two famous silent film stars. Their 1915 tour ran well from February through October. However, the trio eventually split up, and Stan moved on to other adventures. Between 1916 and 1918, Stan, Alice Cook, and Baldwin Cook were the members of the Stan Jefferson Trio. Alice and Baldwin's friendship would last far beyond their time together on stage. Oliver Hardy, though, was yet another significant individual Stan met in 1921. The Lucky Dog, a silent film, was their only collaboration. There wasn't the renowned collaboration that we're all familiar with and fond of. Simultaneously, Stan crossed paths with actress May Dolberg. Stan Jefferson, his stage name, had 13 letters, which she said was bad luck. Stan decided to start over by changing his stage name to Laurel out of fear of bad luck. Laurel quickly accepted a weekly salary offer of $75.00 to star in 2 real musicals, which he eagerly accepted. Following the May release of his debut feature Nuts, he was hired by Universal. The saying goes, that deal didn't last long in Hollywood. Due to organizational needs, the show was canceled. The 1922 spoof Mud and Sand, which was its own kind of ridiculous, was one of many films in which Stan and May collaborated. In 1924, Stan finally made his move into Hollywood when he inked a deal with Joe Rock to star in 12 two-reel comedies. A peculiarity was spelled out in the contract. May Dolberg was not to appear in any of these films. In 1925, when May began interfering with Stan's work, Joe Rock sent her money and a one-way ticket back to Australia, her place of birth, because he believed that her negative attitude was preventing Stan from getting things done. Their relationship ended after May agreed. In contrast, Stan's work had only just started. Between 1924 and 1925, Stan produced several comedies, including Detained and Mandarin Mix-Up. Even though he didn't appear in any of them, by 1925 he had either directed or co-directed 10 silent shorts. But yes, Nanette, Wandering Papa, and Madam Mystery all had Hardy, who would later become his comedic partner, in them. There was no mistaking that Laurel's star was rising. Although they weren't quite a formidable duo just yet, he and Hardy were well on their way to becoming one of the greatest comedy teams of all time. Signing with Hal Roach Studios was a major step forward for his career. At first, he intended to write and direct extensively. In 1925, he even helmed a film titled Yes, Yes, Nanette. In that film, Oliver Hardy, later to become his comedy partner, performed an acting role as Babe Hardy. Unfortunately, not everything worked out. While performing with the Hal Roach Studios Comedy All-Stars that year, Hardy also hurt himself in the kitchen and ended up in the hospital. During Hardy's absence from the film Get 'Em Young, Stan was asked to step in. At this point, everything shifted. Something magical started to happen as soon as Stan and Oliver shared the screen. Laurel and Hardy had become a common television and cinematic duo by early 1927. They appeared in several short films, including Slipping Wives, Duck Soup, With Love, and Hisses, and others. They got along famously, and the folks at Roach Studios couldn't help but notice the audience's reaction to their antics. Leo McCarey, the director, saw their potential and began combining them more frequently. As a result, the world-renowned Laurel and Hardy books were born. Among the most famous silent-era comedy troupes, the group shot to fame later that year. A number of their short films are noteworthy. These include Big Business, Should Married Men Go Home, Two Tears Be Big, and The Battle of the Century. Their effortless rhythm allowed them to keep going even after transitioning to talkies in 1929. Unaccustomed as we are, their debut feature film, With Sound, was critically acclaimed. In 1929's The Hollywood Review, they appeared in a review scene for the first time later that year. A year later, they appeared in a Technicolor musical called The Rogue Song. Laurel and Hardy's first feature film, 1931's Pardon Us, was another major accomplishment. Up until 1935, they maintained production by releasing both features and shorts. Their silent film from 1932, titled The Music Box, was even nominated for an Academy Award for Best Short Subject. They were ecstatic and flush with cash. However, as anyone who has ever achieved a great milestone is aware, perfection isn't always achievable. The 30s were a difficult decade for Stan Laurel and Hal Roach. A major altercation ensued as they disagreed over the details of their agreement. Laurel and Hardy were each involved in separate deals that Roach finalized at different times. So, when Laurel's deal was up, Hardy's wasn't. As a result, Roach cast Hardy in films alongside other comic book characters like Harry Langdon in 1939, and kept him at the studio. Hardy and Paddy Kelly were even considered creating a new television series together. Laurel took exception to this and proceeded to sue Roach regarding the contract. After Laurel's court case concluded, she returned to Roach Studios. However, awful things transpired. After that, it seemed like their relationship was forever changed. Laurel and Hardy would eventually decide to end their relationship with Roach. To produce 10 films within 5 years, Laurel and Hardy inked a deal with 20th Century Fox in 1941. When Laurel found out that the two weren't even involved in the creative process of the films, just hired to play supporting roles, she was shocked they couldn't express themselves creatively like they did at Roach. The films were successful though, and Laurel and Hardy were able to indulge in more outrageous antics as their star power increased. They gradually infused the films with their own work, giving them a more personal touch as time passed. One of the most iconic couples in Hollywood history, they would go on to achieve great success together. Unfortunately, tragedy struck in 1957 when they were at the height of their fame. In case you forgot, Oliver Hardy passed away on August 7, 1957. He formed half of one of the most iconic comedy duos of all time. The news hit him like a ton of bricks. His best friend, the one who encouraged his creativity and understood the peculiar, incredible rhythm they created together, had passed away. Despite his illness, he broke the silence by saying, "Babe would understand." Anyone familiar with their relationship would have guessed that was likely the case. The death of Hardy, however, put an end to Laurel's acting career as well as their working relationship. A number of acting roles were extended to him, but he declined them all. His reluctance to work without Hardy was the real reason, not arrogance or stubbornness. Nothing was ever the same for Laurel after Babe left the show. That was a terrible loss. But it wasn't the worst thing that happened to Laurel. There was far too much disorder and heartbreak in his personal life. A humorous man was seen by all. Once the camera stopped rolling, they failed to notice the difficulty he was facing. Although Stan Laurel's slapstick humor and iconic bowler hat brought him fame, his private life was frequently more tragic than comedic. Even though Laurel's TV pranks made people laugh, he was actually coping with scandal, personal tragedy, and heartbreak, the worst of which was the loss of his infant son. Her relationship history reads like a soap opera. He began seeing May Dahlberg at an early stage. They cohabitated as common-law partners from 1919 through 1925, though they never tied the knot. When he first started out, Dahlberg was crucial. Stan Laurel was his stage name, and she even helped him choose it. However, director Joe Rock believed that Dahlberg was limiting Laurel's professional advancement, so he purchased an airplane ticket for her to return to Australia. There was still conflict after she departed. After being away for over 10 years, Dahlberg returned to the United States in 1937 and proceeded to pursue Laurel financially as he was going through a difficult divorce from his second wife. Despite an out-of-court settlement, the public spectacle served as yet another bitter note in an already disorganized personal symphony, exacerbating the situation. The events of May 1930 were far worse. Stanley Robert Laurel is the name of the second child born to Laurel and his first wife, Lois Nielsen. He arrived 2 months ahead of schedule. Despite their best efforts, Stanley tragically passed away just 9 days after being born. For a man whose life's work was to bring joy and laughter to others, this loss was deeply personal and tragic. It must have hurt Laurel deeply because she never discussed it publicly. No amount of laughter or jokes could ease that agony. Laurel's love life became increasingly complicated as she tied the knot multiple times. After Lois passed away in 1934, he wed Virginia Ruth Rogers the following year, but that was short-lived. Even though she wasn't interested in reconciling, he assured Lois that his feelings remained unchanged. Then there was the tumultuous marriage of Ilana Shuvalova, which allegedly ended because Laurel attempted to hide Shuvalova alive in the backyard. Perhaps out of habit after her first marriage to Virginia Ruth Rogers in 1940 ended in divorce, Laurel remarried her in 1946. The same year he wed Ida Kiteva Raphael, he would spend the rest of his life with her at his side. Despite his personal tragedies and accidents, Stan Laurel never lost his smile when he was on television. The man who had smiled so broadly had endured immense. Tragically, he had lost his best creative collaborator in addition to a child and numerous loved ones. Like the films that brought him fame, his real life was depressing and simplistic. After his relationship with the famous Laurel and Hardy ended, Stan Laurel subtly faded from public view. However, he did not abandon his admirers or his colleagues. He may have retired from acting, but his star continued to rise. Little Laurel had a major effect on comedy. He was presented with an honorary Oscar in 1961 by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in recognition of his innovative leadership in the realm of film humor. His influence was evident despite Laurel's inability to attend the event due to his weakness. The honor was bestowed upon Bob Hope by Danny Kaye, who accepted it on his behalf. The charming performance demonstrated the continued adulation and admiration for Laurel within the entertainment industry. Laurel may have been in nearly 190 films, but he didn't spend his twilight years in a mansion on Hollywood Boulevard. His actual residence was a modest, unadorned unit in Santa Monica's Oceana Apartments. He remained humble, despite his notoriety. Actually, Laurel frequently took calls from admirers and kept his number in the public record. He took great pride in responding to fan mail and maintained the same modest demeanor that won him countless fans. He may answer the phone and greet you as if you were an old friend if you call him. Many aspiring comedians sought his counsel in an effort to emulate his style. Jerry Lewis paid him a visit, and he even made use of Laurel's influence in The Bellboy by naming the protagonist Stanley and casting Bill Richmond as a character inspired by Laurel. Dick Van Dyke was also a victim of this. In his youth, Van Dyke discovered Laurel's contact information, dialed his number, and was invited to visit. In a later episode of The Dick Van Dyke Show, Van Dyke paid him the ultimate tribute by bringing him to life. To acknowledge that Laurel's comedic spirit remained in their work, these were more than mere compliments. Director Stanley Kramer extended an offer for Laurel to join Buster Keaton, the Three Stooges, and other legendary comedians in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. It was declined by Laurel. His steadfast refusal to appear on screen without Hardy, according to a source, stemmed from his desire to avoid public scrutiny as he aged. His devotion to his late partner was unwavering. Nonetheless, a subtle reference was intended, a shot of a double sitting in an old chair while donning Laurel's iconic bowler hat. Jack Benny ended up with the cameo and Laurel's hat, even though that brief tribute was changed initially. Though he stepped away from the camera, Stan Laurel was never truly off stage. Laurel became an enduring figure in the realm of humor through his teachings in comics, films, and classics. Always on the hunt for a good joke, he was shy and friendly. Finally, in his twilight years, he hid from the prying eyes of those who had followed him around. He was in poor health by the mid-1960s. After a battery of tests, doctors diagnosed him with an infection on the roof of his mouth in January 1965. After suffering a heart attack in February, he passed away on February 23rd at the age of 74 while comfortably seated in his armchair. A silent farewell to a man who had once silently brought laughter to people all over the globe. There was no grand finale or elaborate ceremony, even though it wasn't a massive Hollywood affair. His funeral at Los Angeles' Church of the Hills was attended by many who truly valued his legacy. The speech was delivered by Dick Van Dyke, a close friend of Laurel's in his latter years. For Van Dyke, Stan was more than simply a comic hero. He was a trusted confidant and guide. Another notable figure, Buster Keaton, was there to honor someone he considered to be exceptional. Despite his physical absence, Stan's impact was palpable as he was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills Cemetery. Beyond his 190 films and fame, what truly made an impression was the legacy he left behind with Hardy. Their shared laughter and example served as a blueprint for all subsequent comedy duos.